Alright guys, this is it. The Covenant is at our doorstep. We're the last line of defense.
Come on. This will just be like the simulations. We'll be fine.
Oh my god, this is nothing like the simulations!
A while ago, I was recommended a machinima called Spartan Unit Prologue, a machinima following a group of Spartans trying hard in the simulated battles in the first part in a new series. And after watching it on stream with a buddy of mine and trying so hard not to fall asleep,
like he was still able to hear it, and it was channeling into him during his sleep, and finally he's able to wake up from his slumber.
Let's just say I have a lot of things to say about it, so let's just jump right in.
Oh my god! This is an hour and a half? For a prologue? What the fuck?
The story is probably the middle point of the machinima. It's nothing too offensive, but it's nothing great either. There's not enough context or exposition to understand the setting, what's going on in the background, and the direction of the machinima. You don't actually understand, like, what's this machinima trying to go for. There are some twists, but most of them are predictable, and they lack a lot of impact. They're not necessarily done well. The machinima is very predictable, and it follows story beats already seen in previous machinimas. If you've seen a bunch of old Spartans vs. Elites machinima, you know where this is going, you know what it's gonna do, and it's gonna be the same thing, done worse. It parallels the plot of different machinimas, like for the most blatant is Rot's Episode 6, where you have a bunch of Spartan initiates with deep, dark pasts competing against each other in these simulated battles, going up for different scores and stuff to reach even higher tiers and ranks, and oftentimes having battles with their own instructors, and having confrontations with each other, and having a bit of a psychological battle going on here, which either leads them doing something stupid or being betrayed, which then leads on to the Covenant invading the facility, including a lot more that I probably haven't gone over, but it's probably been done before. There are some intriguing elements, but they're not really fleshed out. The pacing is very slow, and some scenes either seem either dragged on, repeated, or should not have been there. A lot of this machinima could have been cut down. It didn't have to be an hour and a half long. You could have been like 40 to 50 minutes of how much stuff is left in there. It's like the director took the rough draft and all the leftover shots he had from his recording and decided, yeah, this is usable. At least 30% of the machinima should have been cut out, and it doesn't help that the ending is a cliffhanger that really didn't feel deserved or leaves any intrigue. It leaves a lot more questions than answers, and that's not a good thing. Spartan Unit has a very repetitive structure. You either have long walking sequences followed by fighting and simulation battles. People complain and people talk over and over about things that ultimately don't matter. They have depressing night sequences about how sappy moments like you shouldn't and about how it's not your fault. Rinse and repeat for 5 more times and basically you have Spartan Unit, save for a final climactic fight scene. Oh boy, these characters. These characters are very bland, with static traits with little to no character development, and some of them honestly do regress. You have characters who act the same from the start of machinima to the end of machinima, including some of your main cast, especially the main character. He starts going from, just the quiet guy who has a bit of caring for his companions, but then towards the middle he starts acting like an asshole for no reason towards other people, especially his own sister. I understand there was some sort of incident from the past, but Jesus Christ, she's trying to open up to you.
One day you will have to learn to let go of the thing you can't stop. There's no point.
Was there a point when our parents died?
Don't you dare bring family into this.
We are family, Eric!
What the hell's the matter with you? And it's not until the end of the machinima when he does a complete 180 and starts acting kind to other people. And he's not the only one, these happen to other people of the main cast and even some of the side cast, while others just remain stoic and unchanged. Characters reference events that we have no idea that they even exist, and they don't even get explained. I understand you should keep world details vague and not explain too much because you don't want things to get too exposition heavy. But there's a difference between leaving intrigue and leaving the audience completely in the dark and not explaining anything and just leave them wondering what the fuck is going on? What the hell are you talking about? What is Ironside?
She's developing a weapon known as Ironside.
What even is this?
And it needs to be taken from the facility.
You've obviously heard of the Helvis 4 crisis.
The day the elites vanished and never returned. Until now.
What?
Characters are not consistent with their personalities, and like I said, the main character X, hopeful and cheerful, and then the next scene acts like an asshole to everyone, and the next scene is optimistic, and the next scene he is depressed. People do not have one-dimensional moments. That's not how you write realistic people. But people act in patterns, and they don't just completely do 180s with their characters all of a sudden just because it fits a scene. That's not how you write characters. Characters' relationships to each other are mentioned, but not really built upon. A Spartan tells us that she's the main character's sister in the middle of the Machinima, but then never brings it up later on, and we never understand why they even had a bad relationship in the first place. Get used to it, because it does that a lot. Dialogue is okay for the most part, but there are some instances of cliche lines and some that dip into the cringe territory.
Quite a view, am I right?
Who are you again?
You don't need to know someone just to listen to them.
Alright. Whatever you want to say it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I also noticed a weird thing where characters would say each other's names at the end of their sentences. It's almost structured like an Oblivion conversation, only with less charm.
Hey, David. Marcus.
Morning. What do you want, Breton trash?
If you've been listening to my reviews, you would know I keep preaching about varied angles and using more camera movements. But this Machinima takes it way too far. There are instances in the Machinima where the camera will not stop moving. Even doing movements where the characters are just standing, the camera will just move around for extended periods of time, no matter what, and will not change up anything. Even focusing on static shots, the camera is always static during conversations, and is unnecessarily wide at times, and leaves a bunch of dead space, and it's not appealing to look at. If you want to alleviate this system, then you should follow the rule of thirds, which is breaking the screen into 3 sets of squares, and you try to fill up 2/3 of these squares with either your subjects or interesting things in the background. They do try to add in some movement, but they splice it in between static shots, and the pan camera is way too fast. It's very jarring from going from a standing camera to a completely zooming in camera that's going completely fast, and then going back to static shot. There's also some weird control with the camera while moving. They have a shot that's just panning, but then starts to change its angle, but then not, but then gain altitude, but then stop, then, I don't know, it's like the director was drunk while making this. You have instances where the camera just doesn't track its subjects correctly, or just the subjects go completely off screen when they really shouldn't be. The camera in the fights is way too sporadic and shaky. Now, I love me some shaky cam and some handheld effects, but this really overdoes it so far, and it even bumps into the map's objects. You don't want to do that. There are also some instances where the camera just doesn't match up with the actions being done. It just doesn't feel right and appropriate, and I don't know why, necessarily. The fights also lack very little impact and drag on for long amounts of time. Having long fight scenes isn't necessarily a bad thing. As long as you have some interesting things happening going off and there's a lot of variation, you can do it pretty well. Except that Spartan Unison does that, and instead we're watching the same actions being done over several minutes at a time, even longer than that. And instead of becoming this epic battle for survival, it becomes boring. It also doesn't help that most of the body editing looks less like choreographed fight scenes and more like a glorified Slayer match, really breaking the immersion. Fights are often played off as these epic struggles that really have no stakes whatsoever, but they play off so epically that when you're going after different situations and fights, there's little very stakes when all these characters are doing all these big moves and such, that the final climactic scene doesn't feel different from any of the simulations that these Spartans are facing. It just feels like the same fights that we've had for the past hour or so. There's nothing different about it. There is some neat use of Forge to simulate moving doors, but even this, they use it as a gimmick and ad nauseum that it really loses its spark. It loses its uniqueness when you use it so many times.
Also, why are these Forge sets so unnecessarily big?
The voice acting. Oh god, the voice acting. There's some good VAs, but they are very few in the cast. Most of the cast has either very low quality microphones, and it differentiates between them. There are also instances where the differences in the bass where the voice sounds either too close or far away from what they should be.
Well, since Michael isn't around to pick you up, I guess it'll be my turn to look after you.
I don't need looking after, Hayden. Really.
The voice actors also talk way too close to their microphones to the point where the audio peaks and you can hear pops in the microphone.
Make sure they're ready. I wouldn't want my challenge here to fail his last assignment.
Most of the delivery is either flat or lacking any context for the scene. You have characters who act out these big emotions when really they shouldn't be, or they act very little emotions in scenes where they should be speaking big emotions. It was more like they weren't directed properly on what the emotion to give off, or even how to speak out the line. I think these actors could do a better job, but it just seems they weren't given the best direction to work with.
It's bad enough as it is with her poking her nose where it shouldn't belong.
Sound and music. This is the point of the machinima that I hated the most. This machinima uses a lot of epic action music, and it uses it way too much that it becomes annoying. Most of the music is unfitting to the situations or even overacts, and the director picks songs that don't necessarily match the genre. He uses a bunch of medieval music in a sci-fi machinima. There is so much epic music that it becomes numb and loses its effect if you become used to it. Especially near the end where it tries to have these big, epic choirs and much of the use of the Halo soundtrack. But it doesn't really sell when you use all of it for the duration of the machinima. It all seems rather samey. It's the same syndrome you get with Marvel music, where every scene is played off of these big, epic soundtracks, but it's all the same, and it's the same for every movie that you don't notice it, and it's nothing memorable, and it doesn't stick out. It just gets annoying after a very long time. It also doesn't help that there's no build-up in the machinima. You should start with your machinima with little orchestral sounds or something that's light in tone, but the machinima starts to start off with big, bombastic, or epic music that's very loud, and it does it throughout the machinima. There's no build-up whatsoever. The in-game audio is very distracting, as the game audio can be louder than the voice actors, or you can hear the same sound constantly. I swear, I hear the same boom sound from Forge World for at least 50 times, and sometimes it's cut in a way that you can hear it one after the other. The audio splicing of the in-game audio is terrible, and some sounds are either cut off or sounds repeat themselves. There's also very lacking of any external sounds that could have been used to replace the broken in-game ambience and add some sort of impact to certain sound actions. Especially when you have them repeated and you don't have them cut properly. You could have circumvented that with inserting different sound effects, but it just doesn't work for in-game. Visuals. What to say since there's nothing to say about here? I can't tell you how many times I've seen default, boring, washed out Forge World, and this machinima is no different. There are some color graded scenes, but they don't look that very good, and it seems like they used in-game Forge VFX, which isn't that very good. It looks very terrible. They make constant use of lens flares for no good reason. Now that sounds weird, since if you know me, you know about my obsession with lens flares. But it feels like they were forced in without any coherence in the scene, and it looks very flat, like using default Sony Vegas flares. It doesn't look good, and it just looks forced, especially in areas where there shouldn't be a lens flare. There's some neat effects using the flares, but ultimately it just looks very flat, and it's so small, minuscule that it's more distracting than impressive. Looks like it's forced in when it really should have been. There's no need to use lens flares when you don't need to. Whew. Okay, where are we at now? Oh shit, it took that long. Okay, so let's get this over with. For the story, I'm gonna give it a 5. It's not necessarily bad, but it's not good. Characters and dialogue, the characters were boring to watch. They often regress and they do 180s in their character development, and the dialogue and interactions with them is either depressing or annoying and a bit frustrating to see how much assholes these people can be to each other. Cinematography, giving it a 4 because there's some good shots, but they're really undercut by a bunch of bad direction and a lot of weird cinematography choices with having static shots and then being interrupted by a bunch of fast movements and such, and the fight scenes are very lacking in impact, and the choreography, it just feels like a regular Slayer match to me. Voice acting will receive a 3 because there's so much differentiation between the mic quality and the actors' performances that it becomes jarring at times. For sound and music, it gets a big ol' 2 because the music is so drawn out and loud and epic for all the time that it loses any and all impact and doesn't seem appropriate for this kind of machinima. Tallying this all up, it leads the machinima to be a 3.6 out of 10, running up to a 4 out of 10, a below average machinima. This machinima feels like a Reach machinima back in 2011, but not for the good reasons. It feels like one of the many ROTS clones that tried to emulate the same structure and style, but not understanding what made that machinima popular and actually good. It suffers from not exploring its characters and setting. It has a bunch of sporadic cinematography, poor microphone quality, and flat acting. It uses too much loud, epic music that doesn't fit and gets boring, and the in-game sound effects get very distracting. But most of all, this machinima was way too long. It did not need to be an hour-and-a-half long feature, especially for a prologue. At least 40, maybe 50% of the machinima could have been cut, since scenes, fights, conversations seem to repeat themselves with very little difference, and the constant walking. Seriously, this could be Machinima the Walking Simulator. I watched this machinima with some friends on a stream, and most of us and our viewers couldn't make it to the end. Don't make your machinima long for the sake of being long. It won't make it better. It will only further damage it. Cut out the unnecessary fat and add in some details that would enhance your story instead. If you'd like to see me review any more machinimas, or if you'd like to see me review your own machinima, tell me in the comments below and I'll see if I can get to it in the next show. This is Grumpy Leet, and I need a glass of water. My voice is getting raspy by this. Oh god, it's been 50 minutes recording by this. The things I do for machinima.
Here we go. Fifth simulation. Let's do it.